I was just a kid when this incident occurred. My uncle and I were wrapping up our task of chopping and collecting firewood for my grandmother as the evening was turning into darkness. As we drove back on a dirt road at a moderate speed of around 30 miles per hour, I suddenly felt an intense sensation of being watched. Before I could even glance out of my window on the passenger side, my uncle urgently shouted, "Don't!" I became completely frozen with fear. My heart pounded wildly in my chest. And then, everything seemed to stop when I heard a tap-tap on my window. In that moment, my uncle accelerated the truck while fervently praying in our native language. Confused and terrified, I thought it was all over until I felt a sudden dip in the back of the truck. My uncle continued repeating phrases like, "Look at me," and "Don't turn away." Then, to my horror, I heard the tap-tap once more, but this time from the window behind me. It became increasingly difficult for me to breathe. I felt a strong urge to cry. Minutes seemed to stretch on as the truck dipped once again. My uncle scanned the surroundings and let out a sigh of relief. The only sounds were the truck's engine and the road beneath us. He looked at me and said, "We will ask your father to perform a prayer in the morning so that the evil will forget our faces." I remember curling up on the seat, fixating my gaze on the radio and watching the time pass by. I listened to my uncle sing an old prayer until we finally arrived at my grandmother's house. Later on, I called my uncle because I had a nightmare about that night. We discussed the incident for a while. He shared, "I didn't see faces, only eyes. They were like brake lights you see on the road. They were watching you." Before ending the call, I tried to lighten the mood by jokingly asking, "Why didn't you just hit the brakes when it was behind us?" But there was no laughter, just a brief pause. His response? Because it was not alone. Grandpa was the owner of a sizable sheep herd that grazed in the mountains of central Utah during the summer. In the 1960s, his sheep herder was a small Mexican man named Juan. Juan resided in a tiny trailer situated in a meadow while diligently tending to the sheep. One evening, Grandpa decided to drive his truck up the mountain to deliver essential supplies and food to Juan. As he approached Juan's camp, a distressing sight met Grandpa's eyes. Dead sheep littered the ground, some gruesomely torn apart. Concerned, he made his way to Juan's trailer, only to discover the door tightly shut. Grandpa had to forcefully kick open the door to gain entry because Juan had locked it. Inside, he found Juan curled up in a ball, mumbling incoherently, clearly exhibiting signs of shock. Acting swiftly, Grandpa lifted Juan, placed him in the truck, and sped down the mountain in a desperate attempt to reach a doctor. While hurtling down the winding dirt road, a dreadful sensation of being watched engulfed Grandpa. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught a glimpse of something. As the sun began to set, casting dim light, he turned to look out the passenger side window and saw a creature that he could only describe as resembling an inside-out deer. This thing ran alongside the truck, keeping pace. The creature momentarily disappeared from sight, only to reappear with increased speed, now bounding on its hind legs. The creature dashed across the road directly in front of the truck. Grandpa swerved to avoid it but lost control, causing the truck to roll down the mountainside. Tragically, Juan lost his life in the accident. Grandpa had to stay in the hospital for over a month. I live on a ranch in western Idaho. Every June, we undertake the task of moving our cows from our property to a location on the other side of the mountain. Since we lack trailers for transporting the cattle, and it's summertime, we opt to trail them through open land. We have to obtain permission to pass through some private property. It's never a problem. Last summer, we followed the usual routine: bedrolls, teepees, and a handful of pack horses to carry our supplies. Essentially, it's an extended camping trip with a different spot to set up camp each night, accompanied by the sound of cattle and long hours spent in the saddle. The first 2 days are always a bit challenging, but you grow accustomed to it. On the third night, it was my turn for the second watch, which involved ensuring that the cattle didn't stray too far from our campsite. About 2 hours into my watch, around 3 a.m., the cows closest to me suddenly became startled and started pushing the herd away from my position. Obviously, this posed a problem, so I decided to investigate the situation. Let me tell you, whatever that thing lurking in the sagebrush was, it was far from natural. It resembled a person, but with long arms, unnaturally large eyes, and its skin appeared twisted and contorted in ways that defied logic. It was the most terrifying sight I've ever encountered in my entire life. Slowly, cautiously, I began retreating toward our campsite. Thankfully, the creature didn't follow. However, it observed my every move. I woke up my stepdad and mom, and together we ventured out armed with a rifle to explore the area. By the time we arrived, the creature had vanished, but we discovered some truly bizarre tracks in the vicinity of the sagebrush. The next morning, when we gathered the cows, we noticed additional strange tracks around our campsite and where the horses had been tethered. To our dismay, 2 calves were missing, with no trace to be found. From that point on, I refused to take any further watch duties for the remainder of the journey. To this day, I still have nightmares about that encounter.